Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Strick and Roll. I'm your host, Shwin, in this episode 37. I am joined by first-time guest of the pod. That is at the local guy on Twitter. His name is Jrue. Jrue, how are you doing?
Excellent, man. Thank you so much for having me on. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Enjoying the beginning of my Memorial Day weekend. We are recording on
Mm-hmm.
a Saturday afternoon over here. I think Saturday morning for you.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, So Jrue is here to talk about his Sacramento Kings. But before we get into that, I do have to make a few announcements. The first being that the Strickland has an Instagram. Check that out. That is at strick.land on Instagram. We're posting all kinds of new content on there. The Strickland also has a YouTube channel where you may be watching this podcast. If you are, please hit like and then subscribe to the channel. That would be a huge help to us. The Strickland also has merchandise on the website. There you go. On the website, check it out. There's t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, water bottles, even anything you want, anything your heart desires, we have on there. The Strickland also has a Patreon, which you can subscribe to. There are a number of different tiers. There's a $6 tier that gets you access to Pod Strickland podcast that I host every Friday with Prez. You also get access to the Strickland Mailbag, hosted by Andrew Steele, aka Doug, aka the Doug Bag, alongside Dallas Amico. That comes out every other week. You also get access to the Strickland Discord, where the conversation never stops. There are further tiers. There is a $9 tier that gets you access to this podcast right here that I host, Strick and Roll, my solo pod, where I rant and rave about the Knicks even more. You also get access to the wonderful premium articles by Matthew Miranda, one of the best in the business. There are further tiers. There's a $15 tier, $30 tier, $50 tier, and $100 tier. Those come with a variety of additional benefits like listening on pod recordings, merchandise discounts, and even potentially co-hosting a podcast alongside yours truly one day. Whether you choose to subscribe or not, none of this would be possible without you. And what this podcast would also not be possible without is Bet Online. Bet Online is your number one source for all your basketball info, stats, news, and scores. Get the latest odds and lines and the latest matchup reports for this year's NBA playoffs. Bet Online is your sports intel headquarters this season, as we have you covered for all your insider sports wagering needs, from basketball, MLB, NHL, hockey, golf to UFC and boxing. The fastest and easiest way to get your betting info, including live betting options and your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your home. Get into the action today. So head to the website or use your mobile device to join, and be sure to use our promo code BLEAV, BLEAV, to receive your 50% bonus on your first deposit. Bet Online, where the game starts. All right, enough of the capitalist, corporatist bullshit. Let's talk a little bit more about basketball. We will talk about the Knicks, I'm sure, at some point, but
Mm.
we don't have you on here, or I don't have you on here, I should say, to discuss the Knicks. No, we have you on here to discuss the Sacramento Kings, who had, by all accounts and measures, a very successful season.
Mm-hmm.
Let's rewind. So they hired Mike Brown last year,
Yeah.
last summer. I don't know if he was the top of anybody's list. I actually thought it was a really good hiring when they did. I've long
Mm-hmm.
been like a believer that Mike Brown probably was a really good coach that got fucked in very different ways at various
Yeah.
previous stops. What were your thoughts when that move was announced, and obviously how has your opinion changed or strengthened or whatever it was over the course of the season?
Yeah. Before we get into that, I hope we don't alienate a lot of your listener base because we're talking about the Sacramento Kings. There were a lot
No,
of
we're, we're kindred spirits.
yeah. Oh, we are 100%. But there were a lot of during the season when the Kings were playing well. A lot of people on Twitter were saying, "I've never seen a Kings fan before this season," which is hilarious when you actually live here because the city absolutely adores the team. So it was a long time coming. It was a very, very fun season. Mike Brown, you know, Monty McNair, the general manager, when he released the initial list of candidates, there were some exciting names on there. I mean, Will Hardy was on there, who's now coaching the Jazz. There was Charles Lee, who is one of the lead assistants in Milwaukee. Darvin Ham, who eventually took the Lakers job. There were a lot of exciting names on there. But if you listened to Monty McNair's end of season presser last year, you kind of look at the candidates and you go, oh, the guy he's looking for pretty much sounds like Mike Brown. He talked about a guy that had a sustained track record of winning, a guy who's been there, done that, he's got a very unique. He has a very unique distinction of coaching both LeBron James and Kobe Bryant. Had success with both of them. And yeah, I'm kind of with you. Mike Brown kind of got screwed over and kind of had this perception of a retread coach that had a very, very limited upside. And everybody had this preconceived notion that he was just a defensive coach, that he only knew defense, right? That was kind
He's
of the
also not old, which is like
no, he's
old
not.
for a coach. He's 53.
Yeah,
I mean, that's not old for a
yeah,
coach. It was weird, and the offense thing, like, so if you go back and like watch his Cleveland teams, I get why. Look,
yes,
basketball is just fucking different. Like, it just
hmm
is. Like, what was really good offense in the late 2000s doesn't fly for what's really good offense
yep,
now.
yes,
And spacing is different, and all kinds of things are different. So, all I know is this: like, I thought he unfairly got labeled as, well, he's just a good coach because, yeah, of course he won a lot of games. He had LeBron James, and
hmm
yes, that's fair. That, like, yeah, you're going to win a lot of games when you have LeBron James, at least that version of LeBron James,
yes,
who was like a singular force. But like, they were the number one defense in basketball for multiple
yeah,
years. They were a 60-win team. They finished as the number one seed 2 years in a row.
hmm
Like, you can't really, if the argument, and this is a weird one, but like, there's always the argument, right? For like, well, LeBron had to leave Cleveland because they just didn't have the talent around him. It wasn't going to work. Well, if that's the case, let's just take that at face value. I don't know why that never applied to Mike Brown, because I'm like, well,
yeah,
if that's the case for LeBron, then why is Mike Brown expected to like win championships and be a
hmm
dynasty with the team? I don't know. And then I think the Lakers situation, look, he goes there. I think they still won like 50 plus games that year. And it was a weird situation he got put in. He was replacing Phil fucking Jackson. That team
yeah,
was at the end of a run. They were
yep,
clearly on the downslope. They'd gotten
hmm
swept the year before by the Mavericks in the
by the
playoffs.
Mavs, yep,
Yeah, and he had to do this weird thing where they were like, oh, a new era, Andrew Bynum, like, and it was just like, no, that's probably not going to be it. But like, they still won. They won 50 games. I think they end
hmm
up losing in the postseason, maybe in 6 games or whatever it was. But like, it was not a bad season. And then they do I think the year after that is when they did that summer, they did the Dwight Howard and the Steve Nash
the Steve Nash
trades.
thing. Ugh,
Yeah. And it was like,
yeah,
so he gets thrown into the situation. It's kind of a Frankenstein team. And it was like
hmm
obvious that it felt like the entire year leading up, or the summer leading into that, training camp and the start of the regular season, that it was just like a matter of time before he got fired. It felt like it was all being framed in a
yep,
way for him to get fired. And he gets fired after
hmm
an 0-4 start,
yeah,
and they replace him MDA. But like, then he does this. He shouldn't have ever done the Cleveland thing again. That's what really fucked him. That
yeah,
was a bad situation. He had to try to make
hmm
this Kyrie Irving, Dion Waiters thing work, and it was like that was never going to work because one, like, now now in hindsight, if we like zoom out, we're like, well, of course that didn't fucking work. Like, Kyrie
yeah,
Irving, Dion Waiters, that was never going to work.
no,
But like, at the time, it was like, well, they've got this young talent. He's not like he's too strict. He's too methodical. And I think really it was a really good experience for him in a way. Like, that weird labeling of him as a retread and this tired coach who doesn't have. I think it kind of helped him in the sense of he was just not a realistic candidate for a head coaching position for a while.
yeah,
So he kind of just like sits on the Warriors bench for a few years. He was a candidate for the Knicks when they hired Tibbs. And I
hmm
remember like it was so every time he was named as a candidate, you always had these people being like, "Oh my God, Mike Brown, like this guy
hmm
isn't." And I'm like, I just never got that. I would have been fine with them hiring him, but I think it really benefited him sitting on that bench, seeing how Steve Kerr did things, and
right,
he worked there for a while, so he kind of just saw like I think you saw. I mean, you can talk to this. I've been talking here for a minute, but like, you can just see from how the Kings played this year that like, yeah, like you can. He's managed to blend. I think like, and obviously the Kings run a great defensive team. I think that has a lot more to do with personnel than him tactically as a coach.
yep,
But
I
like,
agree,
you can tell now that he's blended. Okay, I have this strong defensive background. My offense was good in Cleveland, mostly because I had LeBron James, and it was
hmm
good in LA because I had Kobe Bryant. Like, but I've learned and I've taken these principles from Golden State, and now I am like a more complete coach. And I thought that really
hmm
bore out over the course of this year.
yeah. I'm in agreement with you. The second Cleveland stint was just and I get it. There's that saying that there's only 30 of these jobs in the world. When you get offered one of them, it's it would behoove you to take it because there are not that many opportunities out there like that. But yeah, that really screwed him. And I think in the end, I mean, hindsight 2020, it really, really helped him because I know he took a year off. I know he spent a lot of time with his sons. He was in a consultant position with Popovich down in, he was one of Pop's consultants for a year or two before ending up on Steve Kerr's bench.
He's originally a Spurs guy, right? He was
and yes, exactly. Yeah,
right?
he came from the Spurs coaching tree. I believe he was one of the lead assistants on that 2003 championship team, and then from there, that's where he ended up getting the Cleveland job. But he took some time off and time away, and I think he really kind of, in a way found himself. I think I read multiple articles about how the guy just hopped on his motorcycle and just started riding, just to random places to just clear his head. Took enough time off, was refreshed, re-energized. Pop told him, hey, Steve's going to offer you one of the assistant coaching jobs in Golden State. You're going to take it. Ends up taking it. And I think you're right. The 7 years he spent on that bench, winning 3 titles and being around those personalities and watching that Warriors team work every single day, I really did. That's what a lot of us were hoping for. We were hoping that a lot of that Warriors juice would kind of rub off on him, and he would bring that with him to Sacramento. And in the end, it resulted in the highest offensive rating of all time from any NBA team. So yeah, I was, thoroughly impressed. It was beyond the basketball stuff too. The culture in Sacramento was just so bad. And I know to a level, Knicks fans can speak about that with their team too. Like it's been a long time with just very mediocre culture and nothing really being established. And guys kind of just, it's a revolving door with the head coach. It's a revolving door with the front office. I think Mike Brown came in and from the top down, from the owner on down, everybody bought in. And the result was a 48-win season and a Pacific Division title.
Yeah, I want to thank the Kings for winning that Pacific Division title. I was very invested in their success this season.
Okay.
Put it that way. I invested in their success many times over, thankfully.
Gotcha.
But they were like, so I want to go. You talked about something interesting there about how there was kind of an alignment now, right, with Mike Brown coming in. And I actually, I want to go back to this because I'm sure this was a fun day for you. I want to go back to what happened the year before, right around the trade deadline, because what I have felt, and you just talked about this, there was like a mediocre culture. To me, it's like when you're talking about mediocre culture, it's always like there's no concept of like what this roster, the 15 guys that we have, what are we trying to achieve with that? And I don't mean like, are we trying to win games? Are we tanking? No, but it's like, okay, basketball teams only work if there's some form of a hierarchy and like what players you're trying to get the most out of and all that type of shit. Okay. So what was very odd to me and what has been odd for a few years now in Sacramento is like, okay, they had this like kind of fun year with Dave Yeager, right? And they make that trade at the deadline, which I think it was like Harrison Barnes for.
It was Justin Jackson and Zach Randolph for Harrison Barnes. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think they also got Shumpert at that deadline too. It was something.
Oh, so they shipped off Shumpert.
Okay, right. That's what it was.
To Houston, and I don't even remember who they brought.
Yeah,
in, but
it was,
that was
a
controversial
weird,
one.
Yeah, it was a weird move because I remember those lineups with like, it was like what it was Shumpert, Fox, and Hield. Those lineups were killer that year, but they were like a kind of a fun team. And then like, at the end they go down after that trade deadline, and then they fire. I think Yeager gets fired that summer, right?
Yes.
And like that was probably fine because Yeager was crazy, but from that point on, they've just kind of, it's like, okay, you paid De'Aaron Fox after that, but like, what have you look? Is anything that you're doing actually putting him in position to be the best version of himself? Yeah. And I'll be honest, like, yeah, I think it's very hard, especially when you're not locked into a team every fucking day. Like after a year or two, I'm like, okay, well maybe Fox just isn't the guy I thought he was going to be. Maybe that's just what it is. And they get Haliburton, and you're watching them, and you're like, okay, they're like Haliburton's good, and like Fox is really good, but they don't really like they're not going anywhere. So how good are these guys anyway? And it just, there was not a direction. And I actually thought, there was all that smoke about leading up to them actually trading Haliburton. Was like, well, they're shopping Fox. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. Like, okay, you're shifting to build around Haliburton. I get it. But like when that trade happened, I was instantly like, I think this is a good trade. Like I think this is a good trade for Sacramento because
You're
to
one of
me,
the rare few who immediately thought that.
yeah, I thought so because I don't love Sabonis. Like I think he's a really good player. There's some real flaws with him, obviously, but like his skill set, I'm like, no, this is perfect. Like this is exactly what you want around De'Aaron Fox. And to me, it simplified everything they need to do because it was like, okay, you've got your ball handling big guy dude, and then you've got your dynamic scoring guard who can facilitate. Just get fucking shooters around them now. That's it.
Yep.
That's all you have to do. Just fucking line up shooters, and that's all you can do. And what did they do? That is exactly what they did this
Yeah,
offseason.
that
They
is
were like,
exactly what Monte McNair did.
yeah, they were like, okay, we'll get Malik Monk. We'll go like, we're gonna draft what's his name? I can't even think of his name right
Keegan
now.
Murray.
Yeah, Keegan Murray, who I love. Like I thought that was a great pick. I was a fan of him in
Mhm.
college, and I was like, yeah, like I was like, people were like, well, why won't they take Ivy? I'm like, you just did this. You
Yeah.
literally just did this with Haliburton. Like,
Mhm.
don't
Mhm.
do it again. Just take Keegan Murray. He was a plug and play starting caliber player. Go for
Yeah.
that, right? And then they kept Barnes. And it's just, and then they go do the Herder trade, which I think was
Yep.
a steal at the price they got him at.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like to me, I was just like, okay, and so like I think Mike Brown was the perfect hire at a time. Like I think when you're talking about alignment, I don't know if it was Mike Brown who I think he might have been like the final piece in some ways, but I think that alignment was already happening. And credit to Monte McNair because basically for a year and a half he takes over. They don't like do anything. They're just kind
Yeah.
of like
Yeah.
hanging out. The roster's what it is, and
Yep.
I'm like, okay, like are we what's like are we gonna do anything? You're just gonna bleed out talent, like you're gonna let Bogdanovich walk. Like what's happening here? They make that trade, and from that point on, I was like, okay, I think I get it. Like, and
Yeah.
maybe Sabonis might not be. I don't know if Sabonis is going to be on the team when they're a true contender or whatever you want to put it. But getting him was a necessary step, and it came at the expense of getting up Haliburton. And we can sit here and argue forever, like, well, do they get enough value? I think you can get lost sometimes in trying to get the right value versus just
I
being
agree.
like, you know what? Let's just fucking move on and and
Yeah.
it's not like this is not to shit on Halliburton. I mean, I'll shit on him. I like shitting on him. But like this is not to shit on him, but it's like but like I think Buddy Hield is a good player in the right scenario. But those scenarios for those three guys, right? Fox, Hield, Halliburton, it was never going to come together on this team for a variety of reasons, cap related, on court fit related, a
Yep.
variety of things. And now I think you go get Sabonis, and like right now, all you have to do is like, okay, find a way to upgrade, find a better version of Harrison Barnes, find a more defensive player that can plug and play. It's a very, very simple equation for them, I think, right now. And I'm excited to see where they go from here.
Yeah. I thank you for mentioning the context surrounding those three players that you just mentioned. Fox, Halliburton, Sabonis, Heel. You said Fox, Halliburton, and Healed.
Yeah.
And then also Marvin Bagley. Marvin Bagley
Yeah.
was
Oh
not
God.
going to be. He was not going to be a thing in Sacramento. I feel
He
for the
might just
kid. I
not
feel
be a
for.
thing, man.
Yeah, he might just not be a thing. Period. And look, 2018 was rough for Kings fans too. And the only saving grace was that the next season was fun. Marvin fit the fabric, the identity of that very fun Dave Yeager team that you were talking about the next season. But I mean, his time was up. He just didn't really fit on the team. Buddy Hield, by all accounts, was a malcontent and was dragging down the vibes and the mood in the locker room. And that stuff matters, and yeah, Buddy's playing just fine now in Indiana. They have their gripes about him too, which is not that shocking because there's plenty of that here in Sacramento. But he's one of, in Sacramento era history, he's the best shooter, which is 3-point shooter in Sacramento era history, that's a premium skill in the NBA. You're always gonna need shooters. He's always gonna stick around because of that. But I mean, the guy wasn't even doing that in Sacramento when his time was coming to an end. So yeah, everybody just kind of needed a fresh start, man. And that trade, as rough as the actual day of the trade was, I think the next morning we all woke up, the sun came up, everything was, we were still
You're in
living, we were
Cali.
still
The sun always
breathing.
comes up.
Exactly. The sun's always up here. It's up here when we don't even want it to be. And I think we were like, okay, I think there's a plan there. I think there is a vision there. And this offseason, Monte McNair went out, like you said, getting Kevin Herter for a pretty heavily protected lottery pick. And, just sending off salary the other day, essentially, the other way, essentially, because Travis Schlenk has the Hawks in salary cap hell. So Monty, good on him for taking advantage of that. Signing Malik Monk to a smaller mid-level, and then drafting Keegan Murray. I mean, I think that was the thing that a lot of us were curious about here in Sacramento was, okay, cool. Fox and Sabonis in a vacuum, two good players. They do fit together in theory, right? We didn't get to see much of it the year that the trade was actually made because they both ended up getting hurt towards the end of the season. But if you put the right pieces around these guys, yeah, maybe there's something there. Defensively, there were always question marks. I still have question marks about that to a degree. But offensively, I mean, you saw it pretty early on. There was potential there. And then by the time December came around, I actually think that one of the seminal moments of the season was when the Kings actually went to New York and got their asses kicked by the Knicks in Madison Square Garden. It was kind of after that something happened with that team. They just started putting it together, and then that's when the offense really just started going nuts. And
they beat Boston the night before, I think, when they played New York.
No, the Kings lost to Boston.
Toronto? Was it
Toronto? It was
Toronto.
Toronto. It was either Toronto earlier in the week, or it was maybe Toronto was after the New York game. I'm not sure. That road trip, there were a couple of very, very good games, but then there's that Knicks game where many of us agreed up to that point in the season that was the worst game of the season. Like the Kings just didn't even show up, and then they came back from that road trip just a completely different team. And it was, from that point moving forward, you started thinking to yourself, okay, the sample size is no longer small. This 118, 119 offensive rating, it might carry some weight to it. And it kind of just hung around that level the entire season. And the Kings ended up winning 48 games. And that's all credit to Monte McNair, taking a huge swing, knowing that he was going to get absolutely murdered for it in the media, still decided to take that swing. I mean, I know there were, as much as I love Knicks fans, there were a few debates this year on the timeline about, well, who should get executive of the year? Like Leon Rose has done a great job as well. But I think context matters in this instance too. It's like, dude, Monte McNair just took over a franchise that I don't even know how many people actually wanted that job. And when he took it over, the situation he took over roster wise and cap wise was not great. That's what led to the whole Bogdanovich thing and the Kings letting him walk. Right. And that was one of the first decisions he made. He was immediately not that popular of a guy in Sacramento because of that. And then
that was a tax decision, right? Because
it was a tax decision because because just his cap hold as a restricted free agent was putting the Kings, like they were almost going to be a tax team. I'm like, dude, I would not want my team to be a tax team to get like 35 wins. So, Monte McNair did what needed to be done there. And then when you circle back around, and again, hindsight being 2020, I mean, you circle back around, that decision with Bogdanovich put the Hawks in the situation where they had to kind of get rid of Kevin Herter. And then they sent off Kevin Herter, who they just extended the previous summer for 4 years and $65 million. He's on a great contract now in Sacramento. So all these decisions that Monte McNair made early on, that didn't look that great. All the stuff that he didn't do ends up coming around and actually helping this team a lot. And I'm sure we'll talk about the offseason, but I don't think anybody in Sacramento can really doubt this man anymore because he's really pulled all the right strings since that Haliburton for Sabonis trade.
Yeah. All I would say about, the executive of the year thing is just the award itself. Like the way it's voted on, it's never actually just about that season, which makes it like a very strange award because, technically the Sabonis trade happened last year, right? And it's like, he's getting credit for that. Again, the voting for this, the criteria is just so not. It's never made sense. Like you usually, a lot of the times the moves you make are from like 2 years before, and then they pay off, and it's like, oh, executive of the year. So it's whatever. I think it, like, if you're just basing it off of last season's transactions, it should be Leon Rose. But like even in that scenario, like, yeah, I mean, like you're giving him credit for not making the Donovan Mitchell trade, but like, should you get credit for that? I don't know. It's a very fucking weird award. Like I find, I thought, I'll just say this, like, I think Haliburton is obviously a very, very good offensive player. I am a little bit skeptical of I know he had like one big fourth quarter against Miami this year.
Mhm.
I don't love him at the end of games. I think you can see he's running that pick and roll to pick and pop. He's trying to feed Miles on the pop. He's not
Mhm.
trying to be the one to score the ball. And that's okay. Like you obviously need to do that, but I always my belief is like it's easier to take a guy who's wired to score and get him to make better decisions versus taking a guy, and I don't even think he was over 20 usage this season. Like getting a guy who is capable of scoring, but isn't really comfortable calling his own number consistently. It's very hard to go. I think it's harder to do it the other way. And ultimately, I think, when you come into the playoffs, if Halliburton's going to be your primary guy, the way he plays, like he's got to be your primary guy, I think. Is he a guy that you feel comfortable with in that role? He's young. He's what is he, 23 or 20, whatever the hell
23.
he is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like he's got plenty of time, obviously, to figure this shit out. But I think the usage he would have to jump to it would take a outlier type of leap in that sense. And then the other part of it is like if you're comfortable with him being like your second or even third option, that's fine too. But then he's got to be a way better defender than he's been. And I think that's
Yeah.
actually the most
I agree.
disappointing thing that I've seen from him since he entered the league, because the scouting report on him coming out of college was like, weird shot, very efficient player. Can he produce enough off the dribble as a scorer? All those things, up in the air, whatever. I mean, the shooting numbers are great, but like the defense is, but he was supposed to be a very good defender, and
Yeah.
that has not manifested in the NBA at all, to the point where he's like kind of a liability. I know that some of it is like, like we just talked about with Fox, like some of it is, the Pacers are in the process of putting the right pieces around him. So
Mhm.
like ideally, like while Buddy Hield is a fun offensive fit next to Haliburton, probably not the greatest defensive fit.
No.
Probably does not
No.
help the cause.
Not at all.
And like I like Andrew Nemhard. I don't think running a 3-guard lineup with Haliburton, Hield, and Nemhard is particularly useful to anybody defensively.
Mhm.
So like they've got stuff to figure out too. But I am worried a little bit about his defense. And I think the hardest thing to do, literally the hardest thing to do, and not just in fucking NBA, but like stocks, real estate, anything, is selling high. It is the hardest thing
Mhm.
to do because psychologically you are like, no, this thing is gonna be fucking, it's going forever. It's going to the moon. Like, and Halburn, he's having this great second season. They pulled the trigger on this trade, and it's like, well, why the hell was all the reporting that he's untouchable and they wouldn't trade him for anything? And I don't really understand why people thought that was reporting, because there had already been reports that they had talked about trading him for Ben Simmons, and like
Mhm.
that was out there. So I don't know, but I think like what Monty McNair did is, look, that's, if that backfires, you're not just done in Sacramento, you're never getting a
Yeah,
league
you're
exec
never
job.
getting the job.
You're
Yeah.
you're never getting that job again. And
Mhm.
for him to make that call and for it to work out the way it has, really big. But like, this is the other part of it too, is like, they didn't just trade Halliburton for like nebulous value. They got Domantas Sabonis back. And at the
Yes.
time they got Domantas Sabonis, he was a 2-time All-Star.
Mhm.
And I know people will be like, well, it's the Eastern Conference. And okay, fine. But like, it's a 2-time All-Star. It's a guy that was
Mhm.
like 20, 10, and 5 or whatever the hell he was, even before he got to Sacramento. It's like a really good player. I don't know why that part was just dismissed. And I think
Yeah.
it's really weird. And he was awesome this year. I think, did he end up second team All NBA this year?
Third
Uh,
team.
Third team. Yeah. So
He
him and,
wasn't gonna beat up. He was not gonna beat out Jokic and Embiid.
yeah,
So we all here in Sacramento, we're like, he's playing great, but he's probably, if he does get an All NBA nod, it's gonna be the third team.
him and our buddy Julius, third team buddies, who
Yeah.
definitely love playing against each other.